So welcome to the Compassionate Capitalist podcast. And of course, this is a subset of the Compassionate Capitalist podcast video because this is a video and it's what we do for cannabis industry. I call it the Cannabis Capitalist podcast when it's within my context of that. And just a little background on this because I have been as an advisor to investors and to entrepreneurs looking at hot new sectors and things that go around and what can you get involved in sort of at the ground floor. Everybody's always looking for ground floor opportunities. And the thing about cannabis was that it was an entire ecosystem being created from everything. You can imagine if you could get into the automobile when the automobile was first invented, so to speak, and there were so many opportunities all over the place. That's what the cannabis industry is like. And so I like to have very highly expert people come in to educate my investors and entrepreneurs about the opportunities and the risks and all those kind of things. And so I have some great guests that if you're watching the video, you can see them smiling right now, but I'll introduce them in just a second. They can say hi. Hi, how are you?
Hello.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
And the topic, because I want to get you hooked in so you're going to listen for the next 35 or 40 minutes, is that I've done multiple shows about IRA, self-directed IRAs. It's a hot topic of mine. I covered in my book, Inside Secrets to Angel Investing, as a really good way for investors to get involved and use their untapped resources of their retirement fund to be able to invest in private companies. There's a number of companies out there that do it. The ones that I've interviewed in the past have been Rocket Dollar and Strata, but I know that my guests here from Cannapreneur Partners, they've been working with Interest, so they'll probably talk a little bit about that. But, self-directed IRAs, if you're not familiar, we're going to talk about that and how it relates specifically to the cannabis industry, but they're really your Roth, your SEP, your simple IRA. They are all these different forms, and it just means that you get to direct where your investment goes. And most often they're used in real estate. That's when I first discovered it. And then I had one of the companies that we raised quite a bit of money for out of my angel investor group. And a bunch of that came in through self-directed IRAs. And it was just a way to free up liquidity that a lot of investors hadn't thought about. So we're going to talk about that. And then we're going to talk about cannabis and, the growth of this industry. It is, and I'm sure Michael and Todd are going to give more details about this because they live and breathe this every day. But it's an industry that's growing in the US alone, it's growing 14% year on year, where they're expecting it to be a $30 billion industry by 2025. And really 47 states have some form of legalization, from whether it's medicinal to full recreational. So there's a broad spectrum up there. I've done a number of shows that talk about the legalese of it in different places and some of the risks and stuff like that. And we're going to get into more of that today as we talk about this as an investment strategy. But, the federal laws really haven't changed a lot that allows a lot of medical or biochemical research to be done, specifically on cannabis. It can be done on hemp, but not so much on cannabis. And so other countries are leading the charge on that. But as I've listened to other podcasts that my guests have done, they showed that the statistics in the states where it's legal is that the opioid addiction is down, DUIs are down, and I'm sure they're going to expand on that. So, but let me introduce you to my guests. We have Michael Scott. Say wave, Michael. So after 20 years in the financial services industry and managing clients' capital, Michael became one of the youngest top 1% ranked advisors at Ameriprise. And he orchestrated a 7-figure acquisition that became Ameriprise's first external practice acquisition. He got this entrepreneur itch, and he'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But through those investment and growth opportunities in cannabis that kept popping up, he took a sabbatical for a year and made the decision to dive deep into the cannabis industry and co-founded Cannapreneur Partners as a holding company where they invest in cannabis startups, businesses, providing both capital and strategic direction. And then we have Todd Sullivan. Say hello, Todd. Wave.
Hello.
Todd is the co-CEO of Cannapreneur Partners and brings to the table a demonstrated history of working in the investment management industry with strong media and communication skills for investor relations and working with entrepreneurs in the Cannapreneur pipeline. So thank you again, gentlemen, for being on my show today. And say hello again, I guess.
Karen, thanks for having us on. One of the comments that you just made about this being such a nascent and up-and-coming industry, like if the automobile industry was emerging and just was newly legal, you know, the analogy I like to use is, what if all of a sudden coffee beans and coffee was illegal? Like, just think about how people need and want their coffee, right?
Right.
This is happening globally right now with cannabis. And I think it's a great analogy because with cannabis, there's this subset that had been using it in the gray market, black market for years, right? So they had their feeling on it based on actual use. There's a segment that's got stigma associated with it. But then there's a giant segment in the middle, right, that maybe tried it in college but haven't touched it for 10, 20 years because it's illegal. And then there's also in that segment is a number of consumers that are just like, I've now talked to so many of my friends and family that have had experienced benefit from it, and they're open to it. And so I think we're in the middle of an amazing entrepreneurial revolution, and a lot of experts will agree that over the next 5 to 10 years, this is going to be one of the most explosive, hottest investment sectors out there, period.
Yeah.
So for having us on the show.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think so. So anything you want to add about your bios and your journey to starting Cannapreneur before we get into the additional topic?
Let Todd start. He's got a pretty
so
cool
from my
background.
side, I started probably 3 or 4 years ago looking at the cannabis space, and the more I invested in it, more time I invested in it, and the more I looked at it, I just came to the conclusion that there was just no way this was not going to be the next huge thing. Whether you're talking the internet in the late 90s, and you know, it's unavoidable that this was going to happen. And the regulatory structure throughout the US on it was so broken. The financing of the industry is so broken that I knew that it was going to create amazing opportunities for anyone who could navigate the regulatory structure and then provide financing for these operations. And that's I stumbled across Mike and his group in June or July last year. We started a relationship and just kind of grown from there. But you know, I agree that you know this is unlike anything most of us have ever seen in our lifetime, in that you have a demand for a product that is so insatiable, and COVID has confirmed this, right? I mean, cannabis sales are up across the country despite the base of the nation being shut down. And if that doesn't show you the demand for the product, nothing will. Go ahead.
During the Great Depression, people were acting, you know, you think about recessionary times, Great Depression, what have you, people are buying their alcohol, right? And we think the same is true with adult use cannabis. And then additionally, when you look at tough economic times, are people going to pay for their medicine? Absolutely. They're going to pay for their medicine. This is an industry that touches both of those sectors. And if you believe the Ray Dalio's of the world, who runs the world's largest damn hedge fund, he believes a depression is coming, right? Yeah. So if you believe that we're headed into a major market correction, you want to be in investments where those consumers are bringing their dollars through the doors regardless of what's going on. They're going to cut the fat on things they don't need, but I'm here to submit to you, I don't think that's cannabis. I think cannabis is going to prove to be one of the safer places, but I'm going to add to that, I think it's different than public though. I think public's going to have an ongoing volatility, volatile nature is what I would say, because of the uncertainty of the legal status. Right. Investors in markets don't like uncertainty. Here on the public side, here's what Todd and I know. Todd and I know that dispensaries that need funding, if they get to market, consumers are going to come through the doors and going to generate revenue and profits. So if we invest, if we bring our dollars in the form of debt, equity, and bring our investors along the side to fund those, we believe they're very, very great and safe investments as we, kind of move on to see what this whole COVID is going to bring.
Yeah, and we've seen it. We've seen, Massachusetts has seen a 240% increase in medical applications just during COVID. Florida has seen massive increases in medical prescriptions for cannabis. Oklahoma, the exact same thing. State by state by state, through the 7 to 8 weeks of this lockdown, has seen medical cannabis applications soar. They've seen retail sales of cannabis go up. So the shutdown has had no effect on the industry. If anything, it's cemented its necessity, not only for states and tax revenues, but for consumers, both for the adult use and the medicinal side. And the medicinal side, we haven't even begun to touch the potential.
Exactly.
Right? We have 15% of the U.S. population uses cannabis maybe once a month. You know, at some point in time, I predict that'll be 70 to 80%, like alcohol or like other, other stuff. And if you look at that market, that's going to grow 6 times, 5 times from its current size. That's an enormous investment opportunity. And I agree with Mike said that the public market stocks are still experiencing the hangover, the cannabis stocks, a hangover from the bad decisions of a few years ago, where they ran around throwing millions of dollars at anything. And they're paying the price for it now. We don't own any publicly traded cannabis stocks, don't intend to own any for quite some time, because honestly, the best valuations and the most security you're going to have for your dollars, if you want to invest in cannabis right now, we view as on the private side. And the valuation, if you know what you're doing. If you do your due diligence and you're able to take a stake where you have some say over operations and a board seat or whatever, it's very compelling investment opportunities on the private side right
now. Here's something. So, if you look at the top reasons consumers utilize cannabis, the top 2 or 3 reasons, I know Todd knows this, right? Stress is up there. I think stress is number 1 or 2.
Stress.
Anxiety, I believe, was number 2. I'm forgetting the 3rd. Sleep and pain. So, so top 3 reasons consumers are using cannabis, Karen. And guess what now today is the number 1 major mental health issue? Anxiety.
Oh, sure. And particularly under COVID, right? I mean, people don't know what's happening with their income. They're afraid of what happens if they get it. My daughter is dealing with that because she doesn't want to infect me. So she's being hypersensitive to herself, even though we don't live together, but she doesn't want to visit, or she visits, we're only going to stay outside. It's this kind of a thing. And so, totally. And I think I saw in your other webinar that you did that millennials as a class or an age group are spending more on this than groceries. Is that true?
On a weekly basis, millennials spend more on cannabis than groceries. This is a true statement.
Yeah. That was stunning to me. I mean, unless maybe they're counting alcohol and beer in there and that kind of stuff, because, I know a lot of people that when they have an opportunity and they can choose, they will choose cannabis over alcohol because of the health degradations. And as you have pointed out in our other conversations that, there's all these health risks associated with alcohol and tobacco, which they haven't found in cannabis to be, a long-term impact. And there's people that have been using it, because of the gray markets for a long time and, without any kind of downside.
There's never been a recorded death in the U.S. attributed to cannabis.
Really?
No one's OD'd on it. No one's gotten cancer from cannabis. You can't OD on it. It's an all-natural plant. And so think of it this way. You had the top 4 reasons for cannabis use is relaxation, anxiety, stress, and pain, right? Sleep and pain. If you took cannabis out of the equation and said apples would do this, there would not be an apple around there. People would be walking down the streets eating apples, right? But because of the stigma attached to cannabis, people either don't want to believe it, can't believe it, or are nervous to try it.
Yeah.
And now we have data coming out of these states that have legalized cannabis. We realize that, as you said before, opioid deaths fall, heroin overdoses fall, prescriptions for pain medication fall, prescriptions for anxiety, stress, sleep, they all fall, alcohol sales fall. So the societal benefits, cannabis is called the gateway drug. Well, it is. It's a gateway drug off these other
Of the
things.
drugs,
Off,
yeah.
off cocaine, off baits, off,
Yeah.
off
Or also
opium or
known
whatever you're on.
as an exit way drug.
Yeah,
There
it's an
are
exit drug.
there are medical doctors, Harvard professors doing roadshows and speaking about how cannabis is an amazing exit way drug. And I will tell you, Todd and I are ambitious and looking forward to seeing how the medical dispensaries we're part of right here in the state can impact the opioid epidemic, the heroin epidemic. The reality is, I'll hit you with this. If we destigmatize cannabis the way we have as a society destigmatized coffee. Coffee is a drug. Nobody thinks of it as a drug.
Right.
In fact, I would admit to you that coffee may have more harmful side effects than cannabis,
Nicotine,
believe it or not.
The caffeine is physically addicting.
Yeah.
Right. So
So
coffee is physically addicting.
yeah, so one of the things that I think it's for people that don't understand why there's a stigma. If you haven't listened to this, we don't have time to go into that now. I encourage you to go into my podcast feed and look for the interviews with David Feldman. He's a lawyer up out of Washington that speaks on this. He has a blog on this, and we talked about the whole history of how it became illegal, the war on drugs during the Nixon era, and we go through all of that and talk about that. And I even covered it with a lawyer here in Georgia, Kendra, that we talked about Georgia specific law and war on cannabis when they sprayed DDT on these fields, trying to and the ultimate impact that had in our health of our communities because of the way they were attacking it. So there's other stuff that you can cover on that and get up to speed, and that will get done as we educate the people about the psychological and health benefits, the mental, physical health benefits of cannabis. There will be, and more people will talk, have these benefits. They talk about the benefits that they have. It will come out, and I think that tide will turn, and we'll see what happens in the next election and the governing cycle of the next 4 years if we actually get it through Congress at a federal level to decriminalize it. So
right now they have
fingers crossed on that, right? So let's talk a little bit about this idea, between private and public, right? Because a lot of times, of course, the book I wrote on Inside Secrets to Angel Investing is about how to be an investor in private companies compared to real estate or public companies. And my whole goal of the compassionate capitalist movement is to create change the paradigm about investing in private companies so that people will strive to learn how to invest in private companies the same way they strive to learn about investing in real estate or stocks and add it to an active investor portfolio. It becomes a third asset class that people embrace at whatever income level, liquidity level they have, because with the various levels of crowdfunding, you can, participate in all different ways. And then, of course, our focus today is on how you can use your retirement funds to invest into cannabis as, an asset class. So I know a lot of people, you've touched on it a little bit here. They have a perception that stock markets aren't risky, but with the collapse that we've had and the ups and downs that we've had in the last few weeks, 9 weeks since we've been in this situation with COVID, we have seen dramatic drops, whole industry shifts, just incredible stuff that has happened that has made stock markets, not so good unless you got some liquidity. If you think something's going to go up, great time to buy low. But as we saw with the drop in the stock market in the Great Recession, not a depression, but back in a decade ago, it took 10 years for stocks that dropped then to get back to a normal, like back to square one. It took 10 years because it's much harder to raise the value of a public stock, whereas private stock, yes, it's risky because you don't know if the company's actually going to go all the way to an exit. Right. And I have other segments I did. Hal Martin, I had a conversation with him just a couple of weeks on a podcast on a structure that he does in a deal that guarantees a return that you can go listen to. And then an organization like yours that puts this due diligence, you have a really good program that you do that I hope we'll touch on here in just a few minutes. But I want to have your weigh in on this idea of, and you mentioned stock, like Mad Men, people always go, oh, they was like such a hot thing. And I was stunned at the time when they were first going public and how much they were paying for their licenses was out. It was like, no small business could be in that. You could only be these things. But now you see trading at 17 cents a share, significantly down whatever it was when it went public to start with. And for it to get back up, it's going to take a long time. So talk a little bit about this whole, why you focus, because you mentioned you're not getting into the public stocks on this. So why do you focus on private companies as your investment strategy with Cannapreneur Partners, and what you do to make sure that the investment is, there's a process you go to. So how do you vet your deals, and talk a little bit about why you are making that as an investment decision?
Sure. Todd, do you want to start with that, or you want to? Yeah, go ahead. So, my background, I've got exposure to both public investments and private, right? So my background in public investments is as a private wealth advisor, dealing with publicly traded investments, did that for 17, 18 plus years. But then, over the last 10 years, I've also been active in private companies where I've been deploying my personal capital into these companies, bringing other people's capital into the companies to help for successful launches. I've now done that 11 different times with private companies, whether it be my own or other people pitching me. And I think that my background is the perfect blend, between entrepreneurism and publicly traded investments. And so to answer your question, why am I more focused on the private space? If you look at the public space, number one, you cannot buy publicly traded stocks in the US for the most part, other than on the OTC, right? So if you want to buy something on NASDAQ, that's not happening for the most part if it's plant touching in Canada. So what that means is that leaves in North America the Canadian Stock Exchange, which is a relatively small exchange. It's the junior to the Toronto Stock Exchange, right? So number one, you have very limited access to the up and coming companies. So unless you want to go to the pink sheets, and a lot of investors would prefer to stay away from the pink sheets. Number two, as long as this is federally illegal, these stocks won't be on the public exchanges. And number two, I predict we're going to have ongoing volatility. Let's face it, investors and regulators are going to be nervous about the future of cannabis because today it is federally illegal. Right. However, on the state side, if you're dealing with a local operator that is following all the state laws and they're generating cash flow, right, or have a high ability to generate cash flow in the future, it can be an amazing investment. That being said, you've got to vet the deal. You've got to vet the operator. You've got to look at the deal structure. You've got to look at track record of success. So it's different than the public space, Karen. In the public space, you can pull up a Morningstar report or listen or read what 5 different analysts have to say about Tesla, and then you make your decision. Very, very different in the private space. You want to actually get in there and meet that CFO, meet the CEO, understand the business strategy, really understand, is this going to be the all-star team? Is this going to be a 1%er? Because it's, as you know, a very small percentage of businesses, they're going to make it all the way through to being cash flow profitable, then make it to the next stage of becoming a publicly traded company, having a successful exit, etc. These are not easy things, but Todd and I both think that, we've got the skill set, we've got the track record, and here on the East Coast, there's not a lot of other groups that have, 3-4 years plus of experience doing this. It's the second inning here on the East Coast. On the West Coast, California, Washington State, especially California, the market's been around, for a decade plus. California is really the world's largest market, right? So we'll call them the 7th inning. There's some great multiples when you're in the 7th. Great multiples. So.
You look at Massachusetts is really the only adult use state legal on the East Coast. Maine has legalized it, but I think they got their first dispensary up and running last week up in Camden, Maine. Right. So it's really, their market is insignificant compared to what's going on in Massachusetts, and Vermont is going to legalize. you know, East Illinois or north of Washington, D.C., Massachusetts is it. Just the only state you can buy adult use cannabis is Massachusetts.
Yeah. So,
And
you're strictly Massachusetts in what you focus on, is that right?
We're predominantly Massachusetts. It happens to be our backyard, and so we're
Okay.
we've got a good brand here, so we might as well take advantage of it. But I'll give you a couple comparisons, right? Massachusetts, you get in, it's early stage. These businesses are looking for that capital. There's not a whole sea of investors that have been touching marijuana, going in the stores, writing investment checks for it. It's tough to get the capital. So your multiples are so much greater here. You go to California, there's a whole sea of competition out there. You know what I mean? It's a challenge to figure out which dispensary is operating legally and which dispensary is operating illegally. States like Massachusetts learned from California, and honestly, Massachusetts built better regs. You know, I get frustrated from time to time. The Cannabis Control Commission could be a bit slow, but I got to tell you, I think they have better regulations. You know, it's very, very different than some of these other markets.
Massachusetts is a well-regulated, well-run market, whereas California is still the Wild West. Yeah, so we'll get pictures from the California company. Your dispensaries, no matter where you are, cost about the same to open. It's about $1 million to $2 million to open a dispensary, no matter where you are. The difference is a California dispensary, they'll pitch us. They'll say this could probably do $6 million a year. Well, the average dispensary in Mass is 3 times that.
Yeah, because they limited the number. I mean, part of the challenge, I did a segment on this as well when California first passed their proposition that made it adult recreational versus medicinal. It had been medicinally kind of, they had a green cross out front. You could go get it and you had a headache. You know what I mean? It was pretty easy to get it out there. But in order to get that passed, they had to let the counties and the cities regulate and get involved. And people that had been operating legally for years, all of a sudden were shut down and illegal because that county passed a law. And it was just chaos for many, many, many months. And because, and maybe you'll touch on this, because of the fact that it's illegal at a federal level, and this will actually be a good segue into talking about the investment through a self-directed IRA. So because it's illegal at a federal level, we still have all these issues on the banking side, right? Because they can't do the credit card transaction. They can't bank in a normal fashion. They pay taxes on everything. They can't deduct the taxes like you do in a traditional business. You can't declare bankruptcy. And so that's what creates a lot of the risk if you're in an unstable area, or you just go willy-nilly and throw some money in on somebody that's going to start a field or do a harvest or do this kind of stuff because of how the laws can change. So I think when I talk to investors, I say, look at what the laws are. Get with somebody that looks at what the laws are for that state. And if the state has done it smart, like Massachusetts, where it's consistent across the board, then you can be much more predictable because it's going to shift the whole way. It's not going to shift arbitrarily depending on who gets elected to that city council or not, right? So it's state protections in that regard. So as we talk about that, because, given that it's not available, you mentioned, as a public stock in our stock markets here because of this federal thing, how is it that you can take a federal investment class of investment funds, your IRAs, and now direct that into cannabis? Talk about that, and let's kind of come back to how people can actually do that.
Great question. So in cannabis, you hit extra obstacles, right? The reason why you hit extra obstacles is because of the federal status of the law. So great question. So first of all, I think it's an amazing strategy to access IRA dollars, whether it be traditional IRA or Roth IRA dollars, to invest in private cannabis businesses. That being said, the obstacle you're going to find real quickly is that a lot of custodians will not allow private cannabis investments because it's federally illegal, just like you can't be listed on any of the US major exchanges. So what does that prompt you as an investor to have to do? Extra work if you want to get invested in cannabis. And that's why a lot of investors will reach out to us, because we've already done all this work. We know where to go, etc. So if you want to get into private cannabis investing, and you're looking to do a self-directed IRA, you want to find a custodian that can house cannabis. Entrust is the provider we use. We think they're amazing. The service is great. And they're one of the pioneers that has said, you know what? We believe this is going to be federally legal, and we believe this is fine. So they're completely allowing it on their platform. So we use them exclusively. Now, some other benefits of using IRA dollars to invest in private investments. Well, number one, if you're using a Roth IRA, the nature of a Roth IRA is if you put an investment in it, it gets to grow 100% tax-free, right? So if you have a $100,000 investment that grows to $1 million, normally you're going to pay taxes on that growth if it's not in any type of IRA shelter. If you're in a traditional IRA, you're going to pay taxes when you pull it out later on in life. But here's the cool thing, Karen. If it's a Roth IRA, it's going to grow 100% tax-free. That 100 grand that you invested in that cannabis dispensary when your state first, legalized, that 100 grand if it turned into $1 million, you literally have access to all $1 million 100% tax-free. That's pretty cool. Here's the other benefit. If you liquidate a non-IRA investment to put dollars into a cannabis, what are you going to do? You're going to trigger short-term capital gains or long-term capital gains. So you're going to pay 20% or more in taxes for that investment to make that switch. But if you're using IRA dollars, because the money stays in the IRA, it is not a taxable event for the following calendar year. So there's actually a lot of tax benefits for using IRA dollars. And I'm going to submit to you, Karen, 80+% of the time, consumers, investors didn't even know those dollars. We find that all the time. In fact,
top questions I get is, Jesus, I don't have $100,000 liquid. Do you have an IRA? Oh yeah, I have $2 million in my IRA.
Yeah, exactly.
You can use a small portion of that if you want to invest in this. So most people have no idea the versatility that their IRAs have in being able to make certain types of investments that can just really put them up for life.
Absolutely. And I mentioned to Entrust, I said, I feel like it's like 2/3 of people don't ever even realize that they can access these IRA dollars for these type of investments. And I'm not just talking cannabis. It can be for real estate. It can be for whatever. And Entrust's response is, we find, and they're the experts in this, we find it's more like 90% of the time. I'm sure you bump into it too, Karen, but it's just a lack of knowledge out there. And the reality is, your sector of what your book is about there that I'm looking at the banner behind, that is a hot private investing in startups, in, non-publicly traded investments. That is among the hottest sectors right now in the investment world, period.
Yeah. Well, that's the reason why I covered it in my book. It's because I said, when I started doing research, when I was bringing this out kind of in response to crowdfunding to provide an educational tool, there was between, depending on which list you looked at, 3 million to 8 million people making over $400,000 a year on a W-2 in the United States at the time. So they would be considered accredited investors.
Yep. And
likely, because they're in corporate gigs, making that kind of money, they would have 1 million, 2 million, if they'd been in those jobs for a period of time, of a 401k. And so what a great way to tap the money that's just sort of sitting out there in a mutual fund or this thing and the other, and say, if you got a strategy that you're going to invest in private companies. And now I highly encourage people, if they're going to become an angel investor, they're going to invest in private companies, you diversify. There's all kinds of ways to diversify. And one of the ways you diversify, because the rule of thumb is you got to make a strategy that you're going to invest in 10 companies or 10 investments over a 5-year period of time. So you've got diversification in there. You can go after the later stage ones that are yet to go public, but throw some cannabis in there. I mean, why not invest in this thing that has such a high upside potential, while at the same time you're looking at a Reg CF, or you're looking at this deal, diversify in stages, diversify in industry, and all of that, and figure out how much you can take 20% or whatever you're comfortable with out of your 401k, convert it into a self-directed IRA. If you need to take a tax penalty, then it's going to be a lower tax penalty than later based on your income, what you'll make on that, and then start putting it to work. That's, to me, has been one of the best strategies for people to get involved in this space for forever, right? So
at the end of the day, your downside's the same, right? Your downside is what it is, but there is no industry right now, when I look at the investing landscape, there is no industry with the potential upside over the next 3 to 5 years as cannabis. No. So if you have an investment that has the same downside as everything else, but an upside that's several times everything else, then it's just, you need to have a part of your investable assets involved in that industry.
Yeah.
You're just not doing yourself any favors if you don't.
There's
So
a reason why this industry has been one of the fastest growing and the most explosive for quite some time. You know, I go just 3-4 years back, there were 0 countries internationally that had any legal cannabis law. Karen, in the last 24 to 36 months, we're at 15 now.
15 countries, really?
Countries and growing. And oh my goodness, Asian countries, who'd have thought South Korea would be the first Asian country to legalize medical?
I did not know that.
Crazy. Thailand is now.
Really?
And yes.
And Thailand has some really strict drug laws.
You want to know why? Because people have been smoking weed all along. People know what this is about. It's just the stigma that's been battled. And now what I'll tell you is education is getting out there. The world is going to figure out 2 things. People are going to make a lot of money in this industry, Karen, for 2 core reasons. If we want to boil it down and really simplify it. Number 1, people are figuring out that medically, this is a freaking wonder drug that when compared to a lot of prescription drugs today, has far less negative side effects. And how many drugs, one drug can actually impact what? Dozens and dozens of ailments. Yeah. And then number 2, Karen, this is the other reason. When compared to alcohol, which is fully legal in most parts of the world, when you compare cannabis to alcohol and you compare its negative side effects, 9 out of 10 people are going to tell you they have far less negative side effects with cannabis than alcohol, in my opinion. And it's to the point where even most medical doctors will tell you cannabis is healthier.
Even look at COVID. There was a study out this morning from, I think, the University of Alberta in Canada. Allegedly, THC attaches to the same receptors in the lungs that absorb the COVID virus. So they're finding out that the receptors in the lungs that have been coated with THC don't absorb the COVID virus.
They don't lock down. They don't get that lockdown on their lung villi, whatever. Really?
It's early in the study.
Yeah, the study in Canada actually is proving this. Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. Yeah. People that smoke weed basically are getting turbocharged immune systems. Yeah. I'm joking, by the way, but yes.
The studies, like, if you look at some of the stuff Israel's done with cannabis studies, it's really staggering what they've uncovered.
Yeah.
These are medical peer-reviewed studies in medical journals that are, globally accepted. This isn't, some small study. These are large studies that have proven the efficacy of cannabis, for cancer patients and people with Parkinson's disease. It reduces tremors. I mean, what it can do for childhood epilepsy. And if you've ever seen the studies, the children with this Dravet syndrome, they have 100 seizures a day. Eventually, it's fatal.
That was the reason why Georgia finally passed it medicinally. Was because of that.
Yeah, the drug that they have out now is 100% cannabis derived. It takes about 1 or 2 a week, and it's absolutely life changing, and it's an all natural plant.
Yeah.
And Karen, I just mentioned this. This is the 2 decades of wealth advisor in me. Yes, there's no doubt in my mind this will continue to be an explosive industry. That does not mean just because it's going to be an explosive industry, if you write a check and make a private investment, you're going to have a 10x return. So I just want to make sure everybody understands that. Yes, I believe in the cannabis industry. Yes, I believe in the plant. So does Todd. Yes, we are absolutely convinced lots of wealth is going to be created. But just because you write a check in it doesn't mean that's going to be the case, right? So all startups in all industries have extreme amounts of risk, and it's up to you as the investor to navigate through I call it navigating through the dynamite to find the green gold in the industry. So please be very, very careful. It's not going to be like I'm throwing a dart and it's a 10x today, throwing another. It's a 100x. It doesn't really work like that.
Right. Well, it's like with any private industry, private company. There's the market opportunity. There's all the factors. What's their experience? I know that's one of the things that you look at is what's their the serious serial angel investors. They look at the emotional intelligence. Are they coachable? Where's their ego in the mix? Do they want to be a rich founder rather than a poor CEO? I mean, that kind of a thing. and what's their experience, what's their knowledge of the industry, what's their, I deal with entrepreneurs on a daily basis where I'm advising them on what they have to do to get capital. And, that's all the things that you talk about and what you go through with your due diligence. I do that when I'm trying to get them ready, whether I'm going to take them on as a client or not, on what their capital strategy is. But I want to go into the disruptors and kind of like the segments of cannabis. But before I do that, I always want to ask this other question about the self-directed IRA stuff. Given where it is are any rules or regulations about whether you like a investing in state or out of state? So like, could a Georgia investor invest in, through you guys in one of the things that you're working on up in Massachusetts through their self-directed IRA down here?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Without
okay.
question.
Yeah.
Okay, good. And so then the other question on that, do you want, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, my fastest check writers are investors that find us from Colorado or California. Why? They've seen all the people around them making all this green gold money. And they're like, wait a minute, Massachusetts was the first East Coast based state to legalize. Oh, wait a minute, Massachusetts got the best profit margin in the country. I mean, so yes, absolutely. Out of state. In fact, that's where a fair amount of flows actually come from.
Yeah.
We have people from Canada invested with us, people from the Bahamas who invested with us. So we can take international dollars also, no problem at all.
Yeah. Oh, good. So then the other question along that, if they say they've listened to this podcast and they go to Cannapreneurpartners.com, throw your website in there, and they say, I'm interested in this, but I don't really know. Do I call in trust myself? How do I do this? Will you walk them through that process?
We'll guide them through the whole thing. So what we'll do is this. First of all, we'll learn about the basic goals that they want to accomplish as an investor, right? So their risk tolerance, their liquidity time frame. Because for starters, if you're entering into private investments and you're like, yeah, I'd like to write a check this year and I'm hoping it'll be liquid next year, right?
Yeah.
So we're going to ask them about their liquidity time frame. So the one thing that's very different that we tell investors is, look, when you're talking about public traded stuff, when you want out, regardless of how well or poorly you did, you can go on a computer or call your broker and click a sell order and you can have access to the cash. Doesn't quite work like that with private. So it's important for us. I think the first step is we're getting to know the investor to understand risk tolerance, liquidity time frame, and what type of investment goals do you have. The second thing is we're talking them through what we do, how we make money, and we also will show them, hey, there's a number of different offerings that we're part of or that we know about to kind of try to shepherd them into the right type of deal.
Right.
And 9 times out of 10, if we're going to talk to them about something, we've already pre-vetted it and our money is already in on the deal.
Yeah.
So
within that,
we call it putting your money where your mouth is or eating your own cookie.
Absolutely. And that's always a good thing. A good advice for anybody is that if you are working with people they should have their own skin in the game. So you're co-investing with them because they have a vested interest in that success.
And we have a dedicated person at Entrust that we send them to that just basically takes them through the process. It takes what, can be a 14 to 21 day process in some IRA companies down to about 7 with Entrust.
Yeah.
Within about a week, you can fill out your paperwork and have funds transferred and ready to go. The Entrust has it down to, they just have it systemized, and it's an easy, painless process. We've had probably a dozen or so, at least, investors go through that process, and not one of them has complained. So I went through it myself. So
let me ask you this question: when it comes to investing in, the different types, and I can throw that chart up or not when you talk about the disruptors, because there's, depending on where you want to be within that ecosystem in the food chain, at the source, processing, retail, right? Dispensaries. So, the dispensaries in particular, they throw off a lot of cash. They flow a lot of cash. So when people invest in things like that, because this industry is so cash rich, so to speak, are they structured in such a way? Are they authorized legal where they can pay out dividends or through the LLC pay out a portion of those revenues out to their investors? They don't have to start getting the return and waiting on an exit and the sale of that it could just be almost like an annuity. Will it operate like that for them a little bit?
Yeah, let me use a dispensary example, right? So I think it's a great example. In fact, when we talk about the different sectors where you can deploy capital. We think retail dispensaries is one of the safer places to be, with one of the highest cash flow yield, but also multiple liquidity opportunities. So let's just take a dispensary. Let's just say we sink some dollars into a dispensary we believe in. We believe in the founder. We see it's in the right location, passing all the regs, and the entrepreneur passes all of our screens and all of our background check. We typically write the first check in, and then we have a sea of investors that we're bringing in alongside with us. Typically, those investors are coming in, and it might be a convertible note, it might be a private placement for equity directly. So as those dollars come in, that fuels the build-out costs associated with the dispensary. Now, 6 months later, that dispensary can be cash flowing revenue. In states like Massachusetts, the average, believe it or not, the average dispensary is grossing between $17 and $20 million per dispensary, right? So, and if they're selling their own product, 80 to 90% of that's profit. If they're buying sale, it's still 40 to 50% profit, right? So it's an amazing business opportunity. And in most cases, if you got even a halfway decent location, people are going to come through your doors, because in states like Florida and Massachusetts, there's a shortage. I mean, they can't grow it fast enough right now. So now let's play this out. You as an investor, a year and a half ago, you wrote this check. Maybe you put $100,000 in to help launch this dispensary. You went in on a private placement, and you got equity directly, or maybe you got a convertible note. Let's assume it was a convertible note. So maybe you were paid 12.5% for the first year while there was no revenue coming in. Then the revenue starts to come in, and you can convert that note to equity, and you would only do so if the cash flow from the equity is going to be greater than the 12.5% interest. This is part of the reason why we love convertible notes. There's a lot of benefits to it. But now you're converting to equity, and you're now a co-owner of that dispensary with the founder of the dispensary. And your liquidity event is this: one of two ways. Either that dispensary sells, and for some dispensary owners, that's their whole game. I wanted to get in, and then I wanted to sell this thing for $15 million. And in states like Massachusetts, that's very, very possible, because the cash flow is coming into these dispensaries. So you could get a liquidity event that way, or maybe it was part of a big multi-state offering, or multi-state operator, and maybe that company went public. Number three, you could say to your friend, family member, or another co-investor, or some other investor that you know, and say, hey, look, this is what I'm yielding on this investment. I'm yielding 23% income on this investment. I'm ready to sell it. So you can sell it privately. So those would be a number of ways in which how you can do it. But it's really simple. It operates like any other business, right? You'd look at the cash flows coming in. You'd obviously take a look at, okay, here's how much is going to operate the business, this is what goes to taxes, and then this is what we as investors share. Yeah.
Well, I think this is a good time to tell people that you have an ebook that you've written that's specific to investing in the cannabis industry, right?
We have, yes. Yeah, so basically it's an investor guide on tips, tricks, techniques, on basically how to thoughtfully find and place capital into private cannabis businesses.
You can download it from our website.
Yep.
So if they go there, I think you had the link, is Cannapreneur Partners. So for those that are just listening, that's CANNAPRENEUR. So like Canna and like entrepreneur without the entre, right? Okay. And then partners.com/book. And you can get to it, or there's probably a link on your main page to it as well.
Free download of the book.
It's a free download, and my contact information's in there. Please give me feedback. So that's version 1, where the plan is to consistently continue to add content to the book. And I'm actually really curious what private investors are looking for, and I want to get that content in there. So thanks.
Yeah. Well, it's in the show notes as well. So folks, if they scroll through, they can get it. And then when I send it out to my investor list, I'll be including it as well. So
perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, do you want, what other topics within this would you like to add to as we start to wrap up here?
So here's a thought. Todd and I speak at a lot of different cannabis conferences and investment conferences. And just something that I just have to comment on. We spoke in Orlando in February, I think it was.
Yeah.
And I asked the audience, and it was
actually
beyond packed.
Yeah.
It was beyond packed. It was standing room only. I don't know, I'm going to say there was 70, 80 plus people in the room. We're speaking, it's being broadcasted at the same time. And I asked a simple question. I said, how many of you in the room have either personally benefited from cannabis or know somebody that has benefited from cannabis? And I kid you not, 75% of the room put their hands up.
Yep.
Karen, that right there is why this is going to be a compelling investment opportunity, because I want you and the people listening to this to think about this one thing. How many times in history have people wanted something so bad that they will eat, despite the fact that it's federally illegal and they are technically a criminal for writing a check, for operating the business, or buying it? How many times in history has that happened? And that is why I believe an insane amount of wealth is going to be created, because from the ground up, Karen, people want this, and it's not going away.
Yeah. So, and how is there a minimum threshold for getting involved with, depending on what you're looking at, for?
Work with accredited investors only. Typically it's $100,000 minimum, but we do allow people to pool funds to get to the minimum. So sometimes we'll have a brother, a sister, or a father, and a grandfather who'll put in $25,000 each, and then you just form a simple LLC. It takes you half hour to do online.
Sure.
You
Special purpose LLC.
Yeah, you have the LLC make the investment. So that's the easiest way to go about it.
Yep.
And then you have your own little investing club with your friends or family that can participate in the investment.
Yeah. And we do have plans, Karen, to launch a micro fund as well. And what that's going to enable us to do is there's a giant sea of investors that are not accredited investors that would like to write smaller checks. It could be $100 up to maybe $3,000. So we do have plans to launch that as well. There's tons for us to do, and there's not a lot of people on the East Coast doing what we do, but that is on the radar, and that's something we're interested in doing in tandem with a celebrity opportunity. So we've been in talks right now for a while with a couple of celebrities that may get involved with us in the industry, and if that does come together, you'll certainly know about it, because
and then we could do another podcast, I'm sure.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I guess the last thing I would like to talk about, because I think it's important for people to understand the value proposition that you guys offer. And you have mentioned it in prior conversations about the choke points of private businesses, right? It's the lack of capital, lack of business experience, and how do you solve that? And so within this very diverse industry, where there's so many places that there's an opportunity for a business opportunity, how do you address that? Obviously you're bringing the capital, but do you has the industry gotten to a point where you can have somebody with an idea but not the business experience, but then they can form a team like you would with sort of, let's say, a tech software where you got an engineer that can design it, but they don't know how to take it to market or run a company? Do you see that in at all in cannabis, or are they
really early stage? That's like very, very early stage, like building the sausage, so to speak.
Yeah. I mean, we have some people pitching us who you'll have a group pitching us, and one guy will be the former chief of operations of a company. The other guy is an accountant, so he's the numbers guy. And you have groups where each participant has a specific skill set that they're bringing to the operation, and that's pretty normal to see that. So that's actually good, because we're not, in essence, putting our eggs all in one basket. Is that if you have a team of people with different skill sets, you're betting on a team versus betting on one guy delivering a suite of solutions to the problem. It's better to have a team doing it, what everyone else has their individual abilities they bring to solve problems, because there's plenty.
So you do have businesses knocking on your door, or entrepreneurs knocking on your door saying, "Hey, can I get into your pipeline?" It's not.
Oh my God. Yeah.
We listen. Yeah. There's not a lot of groups like us that are writing checks for the cannabis industry yet. Like I said, East Coast is in the second inning. We see an insane amount of deal flow.
Yeah.
And in fact, this was Todd's idea, so I give him credit. he said, now he said, we're ready to, we're ready to write a wave of checks into dispensaries. So Todd goes, let's do a mailing. Let's do one mailing to all of the licenses in Massachusetts where they haven't received the final license to open yet, but they're kind of in the early stage to get open. I couldn't believe it. We thought we'd get a couple responses. Todd told me we ended up with almost 36 responses.
Oh, yeah.
That's how bad there's a screaming need of capital in this industry.
And the letter was just, we're Cannapreneur Partners. This is what we do. We provide funding for businesses. We provide investments for investors. If you need anything, just let us know. This is who we are letter.
Yeah.
People, they're sending us pitch decks. They're calling. It's just, the need is, we will never have a lack of uses for capital, put it that way.
No.
So now your lane seems to be within the dispensaries because they're such a cash cow.
Yeah.
Do you see sort of other areas where you're seeing some opportunity or, consumer things like they're getting into infusion into drinks and things like that? Is there, or those they're just not as rich in the return? Or are you diversified as you grow in your own operations into all the different sectors?
So we love retail. We think there's a lot of investment ROI in retail, but not exclusive. So we also like cannabis tech. We're actually involved in 2 cannabis tech deals. In fact, the newest one just came on board Monday, or actually it was late last week.
Yeah.
So our newest portfolio company, they're called Annas. So think of an artificial intelligence vending machine for cannabis delivery in a dispensary, or if it's CBD, artificial intelligence vending machine in a gas station for CBD delivery.
So why do you need artificial intelligence in a dispensary?
Well, artificial intelligence is finding its way, in all sectors of our lives. So this particular founder and entrepreneur found a way to bake it into a vending machine so that he could start to actually grab onto and understand, data points. So what the consumer is liking, how they're responding, understanding their, purchasing patterns for an upsell at the end. In fact, this entrepreneur believes that data is actually going to be extremely valuable as the big players come in over the next 3 years.
It has a very good possibility of being the only or the first real-time sales data feed for the cannabis industry. Right now, virtually all the data you get is a month old, and it's from state websites, which are updated whenever they update them. And that data is kind of aggregated and pulled by the big companies. It would be invaluable to the industry to have real-time daily or hourly statistics on sales of various products in various states by various demographics. Right now that doesn't exist, and the ability to have something that can collect that and do that is, we think it's a very compelling value proposition.
So are you looking at deals outside of Massachusetts?
We are.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Florida, Jersey, Illinois, Colorado, we're looking at deals.
Yeah.
Okay. And then if an investor, maybe they've got a group of investors that have a deal that they're looking at, can they come to you for you to vet it and then co-invest with you guys as well?
We see that all the time. These are the groups that we work with, Karen. If you can be an individual investor, maybe small, $100,000 check writer. You can be an individual investor that wants to write recurring 7-figure checks. You can be a group of investors, family offices. We've talked to private equity groups. So there's a number. We've actually had groups come out to us and say, hey, we've got no exposure to cannabis on the East Coast. Will you help design us a private investment portfolio? We've done that. So absolutely.
Yeah, because you have all the licenses that you need to do all of this kind of stuff since your background is in the securities industry.
Well, we operate as a hold co, right? So basically our focus is, getting very early stage, and we're so early stage, a lot of times we're co-founders, on these deals, or the strategic funding partner on these deals. And then we're structuring the investment raise, in many cases as a co-founder of the deals if they're early stage, and then we're bringing the investors in.
Yeah.
Are we using, securities licenses and brokerage firms and things no, because none of those firms are really allowing, cannabis on its own.
And it's not necessary I mean, most everything on the private side, and even the only one within the crowdfunding that requires a broker is Reg CF. So, you know.
Yeah, we're co-investing people, and we're not recommending an investment to someone and not putting our own money into it.
Right.
I think the distinction comes to, Karen, is when you've begun managing the investment and it becomes a fund and you start charging 1 or 2% in fees. Now it's a different story, because part of what you're doing is generating your revenue from fees. We don't generate revenue from fees with our investors. We look at our investors as our name, Cannapreneur Partners. They're our partners, right? They're our funding partners. And then we look at our partners on the entrepreneurial side. They're our operating partners.
Right.
So we tie the two together.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Excellent.
Money from our investors.
No.
They win,
All right.
we lose, we lose.
Okay, well, I think this has been an incredibly informative talk. I thank you so much for being on the show today. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up?
No, it's just
I think that's it. Thanks for having us, and Cannapreneurpartners.com. If anyone has any questions, we're always available to talk. And even if they don't want to invest, they just want to learn about the industry, we're happy to talk to anyone about the industry.
Totally.
Plan.
Yeah.
Anything involving cannabis, we're happy to talk.
Here's my closing comment, Karen. We're only going to be at the second inning of the cannabis ball game on the East Coast once. That time is now.
Yeah.
We're only going to unfold worldwide as a legal industry once. That time is now. So I use this quote frequently from arguably the world's best investor, but here's what Warren Buffett says. When investors are fearful, I am greedy. When investors are greedy, I am fearful. Still to this day, investors are fearful of cannabis because of its federally illegal status, but that fear is starting to lift, and investors are figuring out, wait a minute, this is a time for me to be greedy, not fearful.
Yeah, absolutely.
9 out of 10 people believe federal legalization is lifting, and how can it not? The federal government is the #1 entity that generates the most revenue from this industry than anybody else.
They're not on those up.
Yeah. So, in fact, I had a friend of mine when I was first launching the Cannabis Capitalist segment, and I told him I was doing that because I thought it was a curiosity area that would drive people in to learn more about, angel investing being,
Sure.
my thing. Right. And so, and he said, cannabis, oh, that's old. That's been there, done that. There's no opportunity there. And I was like, what? You've got to be kidding. Yeah. We are at the ground, we are truly at the ground floor, as you know.
Outside of California, most of this country is at the ground floor.
Yeah. If cannabis was an omelet, we haven't cracked the egg yet.
Yeah. There you go.
Exactly.
There you go.
We're just getting it out of the car.
Yeah, we just get home from the store. It was hard enough.
Yeah, exactly. You're just getting hungry for eggs right now. So
right now, you have 11 states where it's recreationally legal. We still have 59 states to go in the U.S. I mean, the growth ahead of us is staggering.
No, Karen, we are pumped to be in it this early, this soon, on the East Coast. We're pumped. So.
And I'm glad you are. I'm excited that I got to meet you through the family office organization, and because you're just a wealth of knowledge about the topic, and clearly you're solving a lot of problems within the financial side of the ecosystem, and bringing people together and bringing a lot of value to the marketplace. So I thank you very much for taking the time to be on my show twice now, and look forward to when other things get announced and y'all come knock on the door to get back on, and I'll be here, and and hopefully this will open up other doors for us to work together in different capacities.
Yes. We've enjoyed it, and you just reminded me, and so I got to do a quick plug for my man Richard Wilson with the Family Office Club. That's where we met Karen. A lot of amazing people are at those places. Richard runs the world's largest family office club. We're pumped to say he's on our board. If you have not checked out his conferences, oh my gosh, jam-packed with knowledge, tons of wealthy investors and family offices rolling around, and tons of entrepreneurial opportunity as well. You got to check it out.
It's amazing.
Is it FOC.com? Family Office Club?
FamilyOfficeClub.com.
Yeah, it's Family Office Club.
Yeah,
find
if you just Google Fanlabs Bridget Wilson, it'll come up. But just the amount of the amount of tools that they have available to help out is just incredible.
You want to be a member just to access their online
Their
database.
database.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. It's a pretty powerful group.
Yeah.
Okay, with that, thank you very much again. And I always close the show out with onwards and upwards. So that's what we'll be doing from this point forward as we continue to move that ball forward. Thank you again, Michael and Todd.
Thank you
Thanks,
very much.
Karen.
Bye now.